just like to start off by thanking a few people. I'd like to thank the Palestine Solidarity Campaign for organising this event, particularly to Marshall, who has, I don't know where Marshall has disappeared, but he's outside, but I'd like to thank him for doing an excellent job of organising our little tour around Scotland and England. He did such a great job that he even organised excellent weather in the month of March, which is quite an achievement. I'd like also to thank Hisham and everybody else from the Palestine Society here in King's College, London. I'd like to thank Connor from my publishers, Pluto Press, who's come along tonight. If I'm allowed to do a tiny commercial, my book is available for a special discount price of £15, and Ali's is available for also a special discount price of £10, or we've got an extra special offer of the two of them for £25. There was somebody else that I also wanted to thank Ali for being an excellent travelling companion over the past week. My friends, it is a cliche to say that a trip to Jerusalem is like going back in time. And now, usually when you see that cliche in tourism brochures, the copywriters are referring to a biblical era. But at one stage during my most recent visit to Jerusalem just last month, I didn't feel like the clocks had been wound back by a few millennia. Instead, I felt they had been wound back by a few decades. Spending a Friday afternoon in Silwan, which is part of East Jerusalem on the cusp of the Old City, reminded me of the north of Ireland in the 1970s. Now, admittedly, I was still a baby in nappies on the 30th of January 1972, on the day when the British Army opened fire on a civil rights demonstration in the city of Derry, killing 14 unarmed men. But I've seen grainy images of the photographs taken on that day on so many occasions that I guess I've developed something of an obsession with that massacre, Bloody Sunday, as of course it is known, and with its pivotal place in recent Anglo-Irish history. Fortunately, I didn't see anybody being killed in East Jerusalem. But what I did see was extremely aggressive behaviour by Israeli security forces towards Palestinians. And that behaviour appeared eerily similar to how British forces had treated the Catholic community in the north of Ireland when I was growing up. Just after I arrived in Silwan, I saw a rock being hurled through the air by a Palestinian youth. At about the 30 or so Israeli police and soldiers who were waiting in the area in full riot gear, and his presence there was clearly invasive and provocative. Even though there was only one rock in question, the Israelis responded by opening fire with tear gas. This tear gas is used frequently against the people of Silwan, and it frequently causes asphyxiation in them. Sorry, I can't say that word. And indeed, the locals in this area have gathered evidence that tear gas is being fired from canisters that have passed their expiry date, despite warnings from doctors that the older tear gas gets, the more toxic it becomes. Just yesterday, as many of you are aware, there was a bomb in a bus station in West Jerusalem, and I saw a headline in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, saying, "Terror returns to Jerusalem after 3-year lull." Indeed, I've seen other headlines in other newspapers suggesting that terror has returned to Jerusalem after 6 or 7 years of a lull. The headline on page 18 of the Guardian today says, "With a loud blast, suitcase bomb destroys Jerusalem's fragile peace. My friends, when I see headlines like that, I really wonder if those people who've written them, and, you know, perhaps headline writers in London can be excused for this, but headline writers in Harrods cannot be excused for this. But I really wonder if those people who've written those headlines know anything about Jerusalem or have ever been there, because, as most of you know, there's been no let-up in terror. Terror is a constant feature of life in Jerusalem. And by far, the worst perpetrator of terrorism in Jerusalem is the State of Israel. Now, the first thing I noticed in Silwan was that there had been a proliferation of Israeli flags since my previous visit there in 2009. This was a sure sign that Palestinians in the area are being driven from their houses, their homes by force, and that those homes are being handed over to Israeli settlers in clear contravention of international law. European Union diplomats, including some British diplomats based in East Jerusalem, appear to be troubled by the intensification of this settlement activity in the area. A secret report drawn up by these diplomats, which was leaked to the press earlier this year, noted that there are now about 190,000 Israeli settlers in East Jerusalem. Now, that's a huge number when you consider that the total number of Israeli settlers in all of the occupied Palestinian territories amounts to about 500,000. Because these European diplomats live and work in Palestine, they're fully aware of what's happening there on the ground. But of course, the European Union doesn't just have diplomats based in East Jerusalem. There are also many diplomats and representatives of the European Union based in Tel Aviv, Washington, and Brussels, who are much more inclined to side with the oppressor than with the oppressed for narrow reasons of realpolitik. And this helps explain why the European Union's approach to East Jerusalem has been very muddled. The report I just mentioned a moment ago by those diplomats expresses particular concern about a project called the City of David. That's an archaeological project, and as part of it, Palestinian homes in Silwan are being seized to make way for an archaeological park in honour of King David, who's reputed to have spent time in the area 3,000 years ago and who is considered to have more rights now by Israel than the people who are actually living in it today. In this report, the diplomats criticise the way that a pro-settler group called Elad has been tasked with managing the archaeological sites that Israel regards as central to this City of David project. The report notes in particular that Elad has entered into a partnership with the state-owned Israel Antiquities Authority, and that this authority is paid directly by Elad to carry out excavations in the area without Palestinian involvement or international oversight. Nonetheless, despite that clear message, there's a very serious omission in this report. It fails to acknowledge that the very same Israel Antiquities Authority is directly benefiting from European Union funds. This Israel Antiquity Authority is taking part in an EU-funded project called Euromed Heritage, which has been allocated over 13 million euros, or 13.5 million euros, or 12 million pounds between 2008 and 2012. That's despite how the same authority's headquarters are located in the Rockefeller Museum, also in East Jerusalem. And this is just one example of how the European Union is failing to live up to its legal obligation not to deal with Israeli institutions based in East Jerusalem, and not to do anything that would confer legitimacy on Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967. Another example of this is that Europol, which is the European Union's police cooperation office, is examining ways of boosting its relationship with the Israeli police, despite how The headquarters of the Israeli National Police are also located in East Jerusalem. So what we have then, my friends, is a deplorable situation. One part of the European Union bureaucracy appears determined to avoid doing anything that would confer recognition on Israel's annexation and illegal behaviour in East Jerusalem. Yet another part of the very same bureaucracy is beavering away to effectively recognise Israel's annexation in an underhand manner. So in other words, then, the European Union is chastising Israel with one side of its mouth and kissing Israel with the other. Now, almost every time I've given a talk on Israel's relationship with the European Union, somebody has asked me, what's in it for Europe? What are the benefits for the European Union of this relationship? And that's a pretty good question, because the benefits are not automatically apparent. But from talking to some officials in Brussels, I've realised that many of them are in awe of Israel. They are particularly in awe of how Israel has turned itself into the kind of high-tech economy that they would like the European Union to become. Israel allocates about 5% of its gross domestic product to scientific research. On a proportionate basis, that's about twice as much as the Americans do. The European Union, by contrast, the European Union's 27 countries, by contrast, collectively allocate about 2% of their gross domestic product for scientific research, even though they had set themselves a target of increasing that level to 3% by last year, 2010. Now, even though the EU has missed that target, scientific research is a high priority for the European Commission, the EU's executive, and is one of its top areas of expenditure. The European Commission's Science Department is particularly envious of how technology accounts for about 40% of Israeli exports, and how such advances as text messaging, instant messaging on the internet were pioneered by some Israeli firms. So for that reason, there's a feeling among some officials in Brussels that the European Union needs to foster close relations with Israel if Europe's homegrown technology sector is ever to flourish. My friends, Israel's inventions are not confined to innocuous things that we use on the internet or that we can use with our mobile phones. Israel is also a top manufacturer of weapons. Indeed, new data compiled by the Stockholm Institute for International Peace Research recently shows that 3 Israeli firms feature on the list of the top 100 weapons manufacturers in the world. The names of those 3 companies are Elbit, Israel Aerospace Industries, and Rafael. And all 3 of them are agents of Israeli apartheid. Now, according to a definition of apartheid approved by the United Nations back in 1973, apartheid involves the domination of one racial group over another. 2 of these companies, Elbit and Israel Aerospace Industries, manufacture the pilotless drones or unmanned aerial vehicles that were used to kill and terrorize Palestinians in Gaza during Operation Cast Lead in 2008 and 2009. And all 3 of these companies make surveillance equipment that is used to lock Palestinians into what the anthropologist and human rights activist Jeff Halper calls a matrix of control. So clearly then, their products are being used to subjugate Palestinians in a way that meets the UN's definition of apartheid. Interestingly enough, myself and Ali were in Birmingham yesterday. Close to Birmingham, there's a place called Lichfield, I think it's slightly to the north of Birmingham. Elbit, the company I mentioned a moment ago, has a production facility in Lichfield. And that's where some of the engines for these drones, for one of these particular drones called the Hermes 450, are manufactured. So the next time you hear about attacks by Israel in Gaza, you might want to ask where those engines, the engines used in those attacks were made. There's a distinct possibility they might have been made in the second largest city in this country. Now there's another thing that these three companies have in common. All three of them are getting money from me. All three of them are getting money from the European taxpayer. Israel, my friends, is the main foreign participant in the European Union's multi-annual programme for scientific research, or the Framework Programme for Scientific Research, as it's officially known. This programme has been allocated a total of about 53 billion euros, which is over 46 billion pounds between 2007 and 2013. And at the moment, Israel is taking part in 800 European Union financed scientific research projects, which have a total value of over 4 billion euros. And Israeli officials have told me that they expect they will have directly drawn down more than 500 million euros worth of science grants by the time the EU's programme concludes in 2013. The awarding of public grants to these merchants of debt makes a mockery of official EU assurances that all of the research it's funding is of a civilian nature. The reality is there are no safeguards in place to prevent the fruits of this research being used for military ends. I know for a fact that discussions are taking place at the moment about whether or not hardcore military research can be funded from the next phase. The actual development of weapons for the wars of the future can be financed under the next phase of this, under the next program, which will start in 2014. Academics in a city you might have heard of called Manchester are coordinating many of these discussions. And without doubt, the Israeli government and its friends in the arms industry will be keeping a close eye on how these discussions progress. Now, this might seem a little bit, the question of EU scientific research might seem a tiny bit remote for King's College, unless you're perhaps a science student, but there's a database on a website I'd suggest you should look at. The website is called Cordis, C-O-R-D-I-S. In that website you can do a search, you can put in the name of your own university and find out if it's involved in any research activities with Israeli companies or Israeli universities. I had a little bit of time this afternoon, so I typed in the name King's College London into that database, and I came up with a number of hits. And I found out, for example, that King's College London is taking part in a nanotechnology project, and that there's also an Israeli partner in that nanotechnology project. The name of that Israeli partner, you might have heard of it because it's you can see some of its shops, at least in one part of London. It's called Ahava. Ahava is a cosmetics company. It manufactures things. It says it sells Dead Sea cosmetics. But I understand from Frank and from Asa here that Ahava is extremely active in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. I'd encourage you, my friends, any of you who are active in the Palestine Society here in the university, to look into this further, to do some further research. I'm very happy to talk to you about that, and to raise these joint projects in which King's College London is involved with Israeli companies and Israeli universities, with the authorities in this university and with your students' union, and try and put pressure on them to put an end and to withdraw from these projects, or at least not to sign up to any new projects when they come under discussion. Now, as I mentioned earlier, apartheid has been treated as a crime under a United Nations Convention since 1973. Apartheid is also considered a crime against humanity under the 2002 Rome Statute, which led to the formation of the International Criminal Court. The European Union, including the British government, are nominally strong supporters of the International Criminal Court. So the European Union and Britain are legally obliged to take robust action against apartheid, no matter where the crime of apartheid may be committed. But last month, senior EU representatives rolled out the red carpet for Avigdor Lieberman, the Israeli foreign minister, when he visited Brussels. Since joining the Israeli government in 2009, Lieberman and his party, Israel Beitenu, or Israel Our Home, have made overtly racist comments an increasingly common feature of debates in the Knesset. In October of last year, just to give you one example, a parliamentarian with this party called David Rotem said, and I quote, "Every Jewish community needs one Arab. Otherwise, who will repair my fridge when it breaks down on the Sabbath?" End of quote. Now just imagine for a second that one of your local MPs here was to stand up in the House of Commons and say something similar about black people living here in London. How many seconds would it take before that member of parliament was reprimanded? Yet in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, these kind of parliamentarians can spout this kind of hateful invective without fear of being disciplined. And worse again, there's a whole raft of laws and bills going through the Knesset at the moment designed to make the apartheid nature of the Israeli state even more draconian. I think Ali will give you further details on those, so I won't go into any details about them at this stage. What I'd just like to say, and I'll wrap up on this point. When I was in Glasgow on Saturday, a woman came up to me afterwards and said, it's very important that we say to people that, they shouldn't do nothing just because they can only do a little, I first learned about apartheid when I was about that high, just from a very simple thing. One day I was in a grocery shop with my mother, and I heard my mother marching up to the counter and telling the manager of the grocery shop that she wouldn't be buying the oranges that were on sale that day because they came from South Africa, a land where black people were denied their basic rights. And years later I visited the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, where there was a whole section devoted to how simple actions like those taken by my mother and actions taken throughout the world helped end white minority rule in South Africa. Apartheid, that simple action obviously educated me, and just as it educated me, I think the actions of the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, about which Ali will speak at greater length, can be of huge importance in raising awareness about the reality of apartheid in South Africa, in Israel. I'm sorry. Just finally, I'd like to refer you to a recent opinion poll by the BBC indicating that Israel is among the least popular countries in the world in terms of public opinion. Without demonizing ordinary Israelis in any way, I would encourage you to do what you can to make the state of Israel even more reviled. Israel, my friends, needs to be told in plain and simple terms that it has no right to exist as an apartheid state. Everything must be done to defeat apartheid. Thanks very much.